Back here on the Mighty 690, 740 on the clock, and we have joining us in studio State Representative Dr. Ron Bryce. And good morning, sir.
Good morning, James.
Hey.
It's great to be here, and we have a special guest today that I'm looking forward to hearing from.
Absolutely. So you contacted me and said, hey, I'd like to bring in State Representative Pat Proctor. And I said, well, that sounds like a great idea. So we're really excited to welcome him to the KGGF airwaves. We have him on the phones here this morning. Good morning, sir. How you doing?
Hey, Pat. Good to hear from you. This is Ron Bryce. I just want everybody to know, first of all, one of the pleasures of being in the state legislature, one of the things I'm grateful for is just all the notable people that you meet and work on issues together. And Representative Pat Proctor has been one of those people. He's a retired United States Army colonel. He's an author. He's an educator. He's, from what I understand, he's even worked on war game computer simulation models. But the thing I like best about Representative Proctor is, if you're ever in Leavenworth, there's the best Thai food restaurant in the state, and it's Pat and his wife, Ari. So, Pat, welcome to the program. And I know you're the chairman of the House Elections and Ethics Committee, and I noticed this session, there were so many times you got up to the well in the state legislature and you championed very important legislation, sometimes against an onslaught of kickback. And I wondered if you would mind, since you're the chairman of the committee, some of these bills that were passed might be interesting to the people in Montgomery County and southeast Kansas. One that comes into mind especially is HCR 5004. It's a proposed constitutional amendment. I was wondering if you might go over some of that with us.
Yeah, we had a real banner year, and it was thanks to a lot of great colleagues like you that were standing strong to help us restore confidence in our elections. You know, I've been the chairman of the Elections Committee for the last 3 years, and I've been on the Elections Committee for 5 years, and what I've focused on in that time is bringing people back into the process, you know, because so many people have just given up on our elections, and so we've got to address their concerns and restore confidence. And one of the number one things I heard last year was concerns about non-citizens voting, and so I'm like, hey, that's low-hanging fruit. Let's do something about that. When I dug into it, what I discovered is it's actually nowhere in statute and nowhere in our Constitution that you have to be a citizen to vote, because it's so obvious that nobody ever thought to write it down. So the way our Constitution's written is every citizen can vote, and it's silent on whether non-citizens can vote. So with your help and the help of a lot of other great colleagues in the House, we were able to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot for November 2026. They'll just allow Kansans with one voice to very clearly say, yes, only citizens can vote in the state of Kansas. But once you do that, you've also got to be able to enforce it. You've got to be able to tell people, hey, we've looked and there aren't people on the voter rolls. And so something else we did this year is, a lot of people don't know that you don't have to be a citizen to get a real ID. You just have to show that you are who you say you are and that you're in the country legally. And the DMV is collecting all that data, so they know who has a driver's license that is and is not a citizen. And so we're going to require every quarter that the DMV share with the Secretary of State's office. These are all of the non-citizens that we gave driver's licenses to. They can scrub the voter rolls and make sure none of those folks are showing up on the voter rolls. And it does happen, because those clerks 500 times a day, they say, would you like to register to vote? And so sometimes they accidentally ask a non-citizen. The last time the Secretary of State's office checked, they found 80 non-citizens on the voter rolls, and they have evidence that 20 of them have voted. And so let's just scrub our voter rolls so we can confidently tell Kansans, no, non-citizens aren't voting in our state.
Right. That really does help, Pat, with the confidence that people have in our elections. And I know, for instance, here in Montgomery County, some of the elections have been decided by 20 or 30 votes. And so we're talking about potentially enough non-citizen voting to throw an election. So I appreciate your work on that. There was also a bill, I believe, about prohibiting foreign money on in elections for constitutional amendments. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. Something that I kind of in the off season when we started looking at campaign finance reform and how campaigns are funded, that we discovered is that there's a loophole in our law. It's already illegal at the federal level for any candidate, whether you're running for dog catcher or president of the United States, to take money from a foreign national. But there's no law that says that if you're campaigning for or against a constitutional amendment, that you can't take foreign money. And when I dug into it, I discovered that in 2022, all those groups that were campaigning for vote no on value in both amendment, they took well over $1 million, $1.6 million from foreign nationals, and that's just the money that we know about. And so we passed a law that says if you're going to participate in the political process and the elections process on a constitutional amendment, you can't take foreign money. And we must have hit pretty close to the mark because they just sued the law. They're trying to stop it from going into effect. So we've definitely hit a nerve with folks that are trying to subvert our political process. And so I'm pretty confident. There's a lot of case law that says that we can limit the political activity of foreign nationals inside our country. So I'm very confident that it's going to survive a court challenge. But that's one of the things we did this year.
Yeah, I noticed in the legislature sometimes you know when you're on mark by how loudly the opposition cries out. So that was one that really did seem to hit the mark. And you said 1.6 million in the 2022 amendment. That seems phenomenal. Is this something you you initially just were researching through the statutes and you came across this? It sounds like you do a lot of research.
Yeah, this. I'm really passionate about this topic. We've got a crisis of voter confidence in our country. It really started in 2020, but if you know as well as I do, when you're out campaigning, you're knocking on doors, a lot of folks have just given up on the process. And I was with 25 years in the Army, including tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and a lot of other bad places where people have given up on elections and given up on civil processes to settle their disputes. And they're picking up guns and they're shooting each other over it. And, I swore an oath to defend our Constitution and defend our form of government, defend our way of life. And that oath didn't end when I took off the uniform. So I take this very seriously. We've got to restore confidence in our elections and bring people back into the process.
Just one quick question about the foreign money and the constitutional elections. Do you have any idea? I've looked this up. I can't seem to find the answer. Do you know which foreign countries are involved mostly with these elections in Kansas?
Well, so there is one fella in particular. You're probably expecting me to say China or Russia, but there's this one guy from Switzerland. His name's Hans-Jörg Wyss, and he's a billionaire, and he gives millions and millions of dollars to left-leaning groups that are engaged in these constitutional amendment campaigns. We actually get off easy because we don't have a citizen ballot process where citizens can do petitions to get things on the ballot. Out in Missouri, he is dumping millions and millions of dollars into rewriting their state constitution. This is a foreign national who's not a valid elector in any state in the union, rewriting state constitutions with his checkbook. I mean, I think it's shocking, and to me, it's just common sense that only Kansans should be deciding Kansas elections, not some foreign billionaire from Switzerland.
Right. It seems common sense, but sometimes we have to legislate what ought to be common sense.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject of money in campaigns, I think there was HB 2054, Senate substitute for HB 2054, which is a law that was passed dealing with campaign contribution limits. Maybe you could give a little background on that, because I feel like I'm relatively new into the political arena. I noticed that people at my house member race could only donate $250 for the primary or $250 for the general. And that sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking about thousands of dollars you have to spend on advertisements and et cetera, it needed some updating, I think. So maybe you could comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, so, a lot of people don't think about this, but when somebody writes that $200 check to you for your campaign, they're exercising free speech because that money is going for you to exercise political speech. When somebody writes you that check, they're saying, hey, I support you, I support what you believe in, and I want to magnify your speech. I want to magnify what it is you're saying. And so our limits were some of the lowest in the country. And actually, in other states, in Alaska, they had nearly the same campaign finance limits, and a federal court struck them down, saying that they were unconstitutionally low. They were an unconstitutional infringement on people's free speech. And now Alaska has no campaign finance limits, which I think is a bit too far. And so we passed that law so that we could stay ahead of the courts, frankly, make sure that we're not infringing on people's First Amendment speech rights, and make sure that we're kind of closer to the mean of the country rather than in the bottom 5, for campaign finance limits.
Yeah, Representative Proctor, I believe I remember during the debate on, I believe it was this session in the House, you had mentioned the last time that campaign contribution limits were addressed was quite a while back, and I guess inflation has really doubled or tripled what that, or cut in half what that amount is worth. So when was the campaign contribution limit addressed previously, to give some perspective?
The current limit, the limits were raised in 1980, and then they were actually dropped again in the 90s. So our current campaign finance, our previous to this bill, our campaign finance limits were set over 30 years ago. And even with doubling the limits, which is what we ended up doing, we're still not keeping up with inflation. We're, for instance, in the House, are the limits that we just set are still about $200 under inflation if you just followed inflation. But it at least kind of buys us some time to kind of, like I said, keep ahead of the courts so that we're not infringing on people's First Amendment rights to speech.
Can you recall who particularly, or what group particularly, was opposed to raising that amount of money? It seems like it's common sense to me, and we're not even raising it up to meet what inflation would have put it at. What kind of kickback, or not kickback, you hit a brick wall on some of that. Who was fighting you on that?
Yeah, there were, it's funny, there was a lot of performance political theater going on the floor of the House, because everybody knew the governor was going to sign it, because we had been, we negotiated in good faith with the governor's office because they're subject to the same limits we are, and they understood that if we didn't do something, we were in danger of having a bad solution imposed on us by the courts. And so there were a lot of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that were up there moralizing and shaking their fists because they wanted it too, and they knew that it was going to pass, that they could make a fancy speech for Facebook, and sound like they were holier than thou. But I don't think there was a lot of actual dissent. I think there was a lot of dissent for the folks back home, which I'm disappointed that happens, but, it's Topeka and it's politics, and you've got to expect a little bit of that.
So you're actually saying there's politics involved with passing some of these laws.
It's shocking. Is going on in this establishment.
Well, one other thing that came up, I know of some groups that aren't primarily political, but they're involved in healthcare and so forth, and they were proud of and actually advertised that they used some of their funds, some of their federal dollars, to campaign in some races here in Kansas. And I maybe you could give some background. There was Senate Bill 5 that you helped champion through the legislature. How does that address how some of these groups can spend federal money on elections?
Well, so our previous presidential administration, Joe Biden administration, near the beginning of his presidency, he issued a executive order, which I frankly think is unconstitutional. This executive order said that he wanted federal agencies who had dollars appropriated for, feeding the poor or providing health care, or a bunch of other functions of the federal government, to use that money to get out the vote in blue areas for him. And, we kind of pejoratively referred to it as Biden bucks, where they're basically misappropriating the funds that the Congress has appropriated for a purpose and using them to turn out the vote for Democrats. And so we passed a bill this year with the help of you and a lot of other great colleagues in the House and the Senate that prohibits that. And it simply says you can't use funds for elections unless either Congress or the legislature, who is the constitutionally designated arm of government with the authority to appropriate funds, unless they authorize it for that purpose. And so, the Democrats kind of screamed, oh, it's going to do away with the Help America Vote Act money and all that. Well, that was all appropriated by Congress for helping people vote. That's not touched in any ways, but it stops the folks issuing food stamps from using that money to register voters and get them out to vote, which was frankly happening. Right. And as you said, our lieutenant governor bragged in a Zoom meeting with a bunch of the folks that had beaten the Value Them Both amendment that's exactly what they had done.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for all the work you've done, especially this last session. It seemed like you were the point of the spear on a lot of these issues in the Kansas State Legislature. I know there's one other, besides being a restaurateur and an Army colonel and an author and so forth, you have something else on your plate. If you could just real briefly, what is it you're planning to do next year?
Yeah, I've announced my candidacy, and I've filed to run for Secretary of State. Secretary of State Schwab has decided to run for governor, and he won't be in the seat. And I think that it's really important that we have somebody in that office who's focused on restoring confidence in our elections. 2024, our guy won. So a lot of folks that have given up on the process are ready to take another look. So we've got an historic opportunity to bring those folks back in the process. And so we need a person in the Secretary of State's office that is trying to restore confidence, not tear it down to further their political career. And so some of the other names I heard out there, I was very deeply concerned about, and so I decided to throw my hat into the race and be honored to have the vote of the people of Kansas to do that job.
Well, thank you for stepping up. I'm sure the people in Montgomery County are going to have an opportunity to vote next year, and I hope they will consider that. Thank you very much for being on the show today with me and James.
Yes, sir, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here in person in a few weeks.
That's good. Thank you.
All right. Hey, State Representative Pat Proctor, thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was great.
All right. And Dr. Ron Bryce, we do appreciate you coming up with the guest here today. A very good, very informative, and really appreciate that. I think listeners found it very interesting. So thank you so much, sir. We'll look forward to chatting again here real soon.
Yes, thank you very much, James.
All right. And we have more coming up.
Do back, hip, and joint pain slow you down? Here at Brown Shoe Fit Coffeeville, we utilize our top of the